So this video is going to be a bit different to stuff I've done in the past. It's more of a restoration video, and I'm restoring this old Commodore 64. Now this one has definitely seen better days, and I don't know it's working. I haven't even tested it yet because I want to clean it before I test anything, because there's so much dirt inside this thing. I'm worried it might cause a short or something like that if I were to power it on. And clearly this machine has been exposed to water, as we can see by this very rusty screw. So I'm not sure what to expect inside, but I know it's not going to be pretty. So once we remove those 3 screws along the front, then we have these 2 clips along this bend here, just right at the edge of the bend. There's one of these clips either side, and so I get this thing that looks a bit like a guitar pick. It isn't a guitar pick, it's used to open things like this. And I just insert that flat edge into the clip, and it seems to do the trick. So now that's done, we also have clips along the back of the case. So to unhook those, I just push and shift the top of the case backwards a bit, and then I can lift it off fairly easily without breaking anything. Then to remove the top off completely, I just take out this little plug here that's attached to the LED. Now you can already see just how rusted and disgusting this thing is. Right now I have some real concerns if this would even power on. It just looks so bad inside that I'm really concerned for what I'm going to find when I take off that metal shield to look at the circuitry underneath. But before any of that, I decided to just take a look at that keyboard. So I want to take off the keys first. I have this key removal tool. They're very cheap. I got this off eBay for a few dollars, and I've wrapped it in this plumber's tape just to help protect those keys from getting scratched by the metal. I'm pretty sure the metal probably wouldn't scratch it, but just in case, I wrap it in this plumber's tape. Now to take the keys out, I have them placed at an angle. So this is what I mean when I say I have it at an angle, and this really, I found, is the best way to pull the keys out. And as you pull the key out, there's also this spring underneath, and so I just repeat the process for all the different keys. Now some keys are bigger than others, but I found that with some manipulation you can get each key out with that key puller without any issues, except for the spacebar, which is a bit too big. And so here you see me tackling some of the bigger keys without an issue. The biggest key is the return key, and I just have to manipulate it a bit with my hand to get it in the right position, but again I can get it on the corners and pull it out quite easily. And if I just pop off that spacebar, you can see underneath those keys it's pure filth, as I expected. It looks like there's some mud in there, rust, and God knows what else. So that would definitely need a clean at some point, although first I want to tackle those keys. Taking off the spacebar, which is attached by this metal bar attached to these 2 little pegs. You can see if I show you closer, the white pegs are attached to the spacebar, which then attach themselves to the metal bar located on the keyboard. Then it's taking off that keyboard itself, which is quite simple. It's just 2 Phillips screws at the top, and there's some clips at the bottom that you can just slide the keyboard up and out. And as you're probably expecting by now, there's more crud underneath that keyboard. So I'm really dying to look underneath that metal shield now, just to see the state of that circuit board underneath. Hopefully that metal shielding has protected it from most of the damage. Now taking off that metal shielding again is another case of removing a bunch of Phillips head screws. Now I did have trouble finding some of them because some were so rusted they kind of blended in with the rust on the shielding, but eventually I managed to get it off. I took out the plug that attaches the keyboard to the circuit board, and finally we get to look at the state of the components underneath. And you know, it has to be said, that metal shielding seems to have done a really good job at protecting the board underneath. It's not only protected it from corrosion and rust damage, but there's not even a lot of dust on it. It looks really clean. But what about underneath the board? Well, there is a separate metal shield protecting that underneath too, and the underneath looks just as good as the top, almost spotless. So I'm really happy with that, and I'm hoping that it means that we've got a fully working C64 here. And if we remove the bottom metal shield, we know that it's going to be just as rusty as the top. We've got these massive rust stains on the inside of the case. So I know this is going to be quite a big cleanup job, and I want to start by cleaning that case. So I take the LED out the top part of the case. There's just 2 clips on either side of the LED, and I pull out on the wire, and it's a bit fiddly, but eventually it does pop out. Then I get myself a bucket of soapy water and a cleaning cloth and just begin to wash away some of that dirt and grime that's built up over the years. This will remove that surface level of dirt, but I know it won't remove the more stubborn stains like those rust stains, for example. And here is the obligatory dead bug, which I seem to find in every dirty machine that I try to fix up. Then after that quick clean, I want to give it a more intense clean. I'd start by taking off that bottom label because I don't want to wash that. Even though it's not in the best condition, I still want to try to preserve it as much as I can. Then I dunk the bottom half of that case in some warm soapy water. I don't do that for the top half because it's not as bad as the bottom half, and I don't think it needs to soak like the bottom does. Then I also give those keys a clean, again using warm soapy water and this microfiber sponge, and after I've cleaned them I leave them in the bucket to soak like I'm doing for the bottom of the case. And then once they've soaked for a time, I take them out again and dry them off with a cloth. So once they're all dry, I leave them to air dry for a little bit before bagging them up to keep those keys all together and out of the way. So now let's check back to see how the bottom half of our case is doing. So I've left it to soak for a few hours. I take it out and then try to get rid of some of those more stubborn stains. I start by using isopropyl alcohol and cleaning cloth, and after a lot of elbow grease I managed to get some of those stains off, but a lot of it still remains. Then I try WD-40, let it soak for a little bit before trying to wipe it off. Again, with some elbow grease I get some more of the stains off, but still some remain. So then I go a bit more extreme and use a white vinegar solution along with a scouring pad, just an ordinary scouring pad that you might find in the kitchen, to try to get the rest of that rust off. And that was by far the best way of doing it in terms of removing the stains, and was a lot easier on my arms too. I'm not sure if the white vinegar had much to do with it. I think it was mostly due to the scouring pad, and I didn't notice much, if any, scratches on the inside of the case by using that pad either, so it's actually probably the best solution out of all of those that I tried. And I got the bottom of the case to a condition that I was happy with. Sure, it wasn't perfect, but if you compare to how it looked before, you can see there is a massive difference. So having cleaned the rust off the bottom inside case, I then tried to clean the rust off some of those springs. So some of the springs in the keyboard got a bit rusted. I used a bit of WD-40 and that scouring pad, and that did the trick. Although one of the springs was so rusty it actually just fell apart in my hands, and so that was definitely something that was going to break anyway and I needed to replace. There was no fixing that one, but most of them brushed up pretty nicely. The top of the case was a lot easier to clean as there were no rust stains, so I just used a cleaning cloth, some isopropyl alcohol, and that seemed to do the trick for the most part. Now I move on to those metal shields, those really musty metal shields. I use some cheap white vinegar. Now you can buy some special products that will remove rust, but white vinegar is by far one of the cheapest options. And so I went for white vinegar because I also heard that it was very good at removing rust. So I filled this tub with white vinegar. I pretty much used all of it. Again, it only cost me a couple of dollars, so it was really cheap. Then I put those metal shields inside, making sure those rusty parts were fully submerged in that white vinegar. So as I said before, the circuit board looked really clean, but there was still some surface level dust and grime on there, so I thought while I'm here I might as well give it a quick clean with a toothbrush and some isopropyl alcohol. I did both the back and the front, especially giving attention to those parts of the C64 you're going to be connecting to other things like the external disk drive or a data set, the RF output, the controller ports, and those other ports that require a DIN connector. Because unlike the circuit board, those parts have been exposed to the elements and were quite a lot dirtier. Having done that, those metal shields were still not ready to be taken out of the white vinegar. I wanted to wait a full 24 hours. So while I was waiting for those, I thought I'd test the C64 power supply. Now C64 power supplies can be notoriously unreliable, and sometimes the voltage that it outputs can damage or even break your C64. In terms of the power supply that I have, there are two pins, the top two pins here, 6 and 7, which output 9 volts AC. And there are another 2 pins, numbers 4 and 2, that should be outputting 5 volts DC. Now more often than not, it's the 5 volts DC that you really need to keep an eye on. Taking a look at the AC, we have 9.6, which should be okay, and looking at the DC, we have about 5.26. And the wiki page says that at 5.2 volts, the power supply is just on the brink of causing an unhealthy situation for my C64. I think for testing it should be okay, but I probably want to replace it at some point. Although, like I said, for testing it for a brief moment, I don't think it would put the C64 in much danger. So once I'd waited for over 24 hours, it was now time to check on the results of those metal shields. You can see the rust there, and the white vinegar had practically turned it to the consistency of butter. It was really easy just to wipe through, and actually kind of satisfying to just wipe it off like that without any effort. Now there was only so far I could go because some of it had actually rusted through to the other side. So I had to stop at some point because, as you can see, there were some holes appearing in the shield itself. So I did have to stop because it is quite a thin sheet of metal and the rust had gone through in some parts, unfortunately. Now the top part of the shield is a lot thicker, so I was hoping that the rust hadn't rusted through most of the shield. So again, the rust came off really easily. It's really satisfying to take it off. And by the end of it, I was left with a metal shield with a lot less rust, but it had this kind of bronzy finish to it. So I carried on scouring just to take off as much of that bronzy sheen as I could that was left over from the rust. So with that done, it was then onto the keyboard, and just like everything else, the keyboard was in a bit of a sorry state. So I took off that bit of sellotape holding the wires down and attempted to take the screws off the back. Unfortunately, some of the screws had got so rusted, my screwdriver couldn't get a purchase on them in order to get that screw out. So I thought that was something that I might tackle a little bit later. First thing first, giving it a quick clean with some warm soapy water. And then replacing that bit of sellotape holding the wires down on the back. So then after that, I attempted once more to open this keyboard, and I did this by using a drill and drill bit to remove some of those rusted screw heads. There's one I've already done, and there's one I'm in the process of doing. It wasn't too hard. I just had to be very careful to prevent damage to the board as much as possible. Now I did end up drilling into the board a little bit, as you can see, but it wasn't too bad. The damage is just superficial and you won't be seeing it anyway because it will be inside the computer. But I still couldn't open it because the Commodore 64 keyboard has this shift lock key which is soldered into place. So I had to unsolder that, and then, only then, could I take out the board. And you can see it's covered in cobwebs and other sorts of dirt and grime. So I used a bit of isopropyl alcohol, a cloth, and cleaned that. Definitely needed a clean. And so did the contacts on the side where the keys were located. I had to painstakingly get a cotton swab and just clean each one manually. And whilst I had not tested it at that point, I was pretty sure that if I hadn't cleaned those contacts, there would have been some problems with the keyboard there. So then it's just popping the keys back where they belong and reassembling my C64 to give it the final test, and fingers crossed it all works. And there you go, it does work. It works as it should. Now I did find the joystick didn't work, and it wasn't because of a port, because I tried another joystick and that did work. So I'll save that joystick for another future video where I'll try to fix that. But for now, I will leave it there. In my next video, I'll try to fix an Atari Lynx. So that should be an interesting one. If that sounds interesting to you, you might also consider subscribing to the channel and selecting the notification bell to be kept up to date when that one is released. Anyway, as always, thank you for watching and hope to see you in the next one.